Welcome to WION World One. This is our special broadcast of the WION-VOA Co-Production with me, Priyanka Sharma. Our top focus today. In recent days, Ukraine has seized control of large areas in the east and south of the country from invading Russian forces. With the Kremlin troops' retreat, the war could be entering a critical new phase, as Henry Ridgwell reports from London. Take a look.
Ukrainian troops have broken through Russian lines in the southern region of Kherson, liberating several villages. Kyiv's forces now control settlements some 30 kilometers behind previous front lines.
The mood of the boys, everything has changed compared to what it was before. It has become much better. There is some light at the end of the tunnel, inspired by victories.
Ukrainian forces are also consolidating territorial gains in the east. The city of Lyman is in ruins, its streets littered with burned-out Russian tanks and dead soldiers. Ukrainian generals say they have advanced 55 kilometers over the past 2 weeks close to Kyiv. Russian forces are struggling to hold their line.
We've had reports that the units in northern Kherson Oblast are completely understrength, understaffed, and stretched along a very, very long front line that the Russian troops just do not have the men to fill.
The United States announced an additional $625 million worth of new security assistance for Kyiv this week.
Ukraine needs weapons, an official amount, because Russian people will tolerate war criminals, but they will not tolerate losing war criminals. And this military defeat in Ukraine provides the first sign of bankruptcy of Putin ratings in Russia.
Russian President Vladimir Putin last week announced the annexation of 4 areas of Ukraine, a move rejected by most of the international community. Analysts say the war is entering a critical moment.
It's becoming, in some ways, make or break for Putin. His abilities to survive depends on some level by saying, I've succeeded in defending the Russian homeland and expanding it. Where this goes, nobody knows, but it's safe to say that this probably is the most perilous moment for Mr. Putin since he took power about 20 years ago.
Putin has said he will use any means necessary to defend Russia, raising fears he could use so-called tactical nuclear weapons.
Stuff is trending very badly for Russia. Now, I don't know how bad it has to be before Russia would consider using nuclear weapons in a very serious way. I'm not even sure Putin knows in his own mind how bad this would have to be for him to use nuclear weapons.
For now, Russia is trying to turn the tide with conventional forces. The Defense Ministry said this week over 200,000 men have already been drafted into the armed forces since a partial mobilization was announced 2 weeks ago.
These forces are unlikely to provide any sort of additional defensive capabilities or offensive capabilities in the short run. And in the long run, these troops are unlikely to be well trained or necessarily highly motivated.
Russian forces continue to launch shells and missiles into Ukrainian-held territory, often into civilian areas. This convoy of evacuees fleeing the city of Zaporizhia was hit September 30th. Dozens were killed, including many women and children. Moscow did not comment on the attack. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
For more inputs, joining us now is Voice of America's correspondent Jessica Stone. She's with us live from Washington, D.C. Jessica, welcome to the broadcast. Now, CIA Director Bill Burns said this week that China's Xi Jinping, quote-unquote, sobered by Russia's poor performance in the war against Ukraine. Burns says that he hopes that this will deter Xi from invading Taiwan. This comes, of course, as Congress proposes a series of measures to support Taiwan and even to counter China. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, there are a series of measures, including one proposed yesterday by 3 U.S. senators, which proposes setting up a commission that will create a grand strategy to counter China. that will just draw together all the lines of effort, so diplomatic, security, as well as economic. And the Commission would get 2 years to come up with the plan. The senators proposing it say so far the U.S. has really had more of an ad hoc approach to countering China in these areas. It needs a coordinated effort, and this would be the way to do that. Now, there is some precedence for this. The U.S., after World War II, President Eisenhower actually created something called the Solarium Commission to reorient foreign policy, especially after the Cold War. Now, the other proposal comes from 2 U.S. senators, one from Oregon, another from Texas. They want to secure Taiwan's position on the United Nations body to regulate civil aviation. And they say, look, Taipei is the 5th largest and busiest airport in all of Asia. It makes sense to protect those passengers, to have them have a seat at the table of this international regulatory body, especially as China increases its military exercises in the region, especially as we've seen recently as the Taiwan Straits tensions rise.
Right, Jessica. Now, defending Taiwan militarily is also bringing the U.S. closer together with new Philippines government. Tell us more on that front.
Well, you know, even though the Philippines and the United States have a defense alliance, we certainly saw under President Rodrigo Duterte that alliance was often in jeopardy. In fact, he called repeatedly for it to be ended. The new Marcos Jr. government, though, in Manila is much more pro-U.S. We're seeing an increasing appetite coming out of Manila for U.S. partnership and engagement. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin meeting this week with Jose Faustino Jr. in Hawaii, who is the defense chief of the Philippines. They now plan to increase joint military training from 300 exercises a year to 500 exercises a year, and using in total some 16,000 combined troops. That is much more than they've used in the past. Faustino telling reporters that Taiwan is so close to the Philippines that it makes sense for military planes and military planners, rather, to be concerned. Plus, he mentions there are about 150,000 Filipino workers working on the island of Taiwan. Priyanka?
Jessica, thanks so much for all the inputs that you've given on this story. Stay with us on this broadcast. We'll come back to you for your inputs on another. As Florida reels from the effects of Hurricane Ian, the staggering damage and death toll from the powerful storm reveals the level of devastation. Residents of Hardhead, Lee County in particular, recount the horrors of the hurricane. VOA brings us this next report.
Fort Myers, known for its sandy beaches and splendid scenery, used to be a perfect vacation spot in Florida. But now, it's a major disaster zone after Hurricane Ian battered the area, leaving destruction and dozens dead. And the death toll is still rising.
It's really difficult to describe the destruction around here in words. We are at Fort Myers Legacy Harbor, and you see what is left of the harbor after Hurricane Ian. As you can see, the yachts and other boats have been knocked down by the storm, and they are basically piled on top of each other. If we take a few dozen steps away from those boats that have been washed ashore, you see a huge concrete block here, which used to be a section of the sea dock. So something that is supposed to be in the sea is currently sitting on the land.
The town of Fort Myers Beach in Lee County is nearly destroyed. This county has the highest number of storm-related casualties and sustained heavy damages. Gas stations are closed, there is no electricity, and no running water. This trailer park community in Cape Coral sustained severe storm damage. Resident Charles Patrick Meehan, 77, rode out the storm, a Category 4 hurricane when it made landfall, in his trailer home. He says he's lucky to be alive.
It was massive. It's like somebody dropped atomic bomb on this place.
Tammy Brown, 51, says she hunkered down in her mortar and brick office with her son and 2 cats during the hurricane. She came home to find this.
It's very heartbreaking because we just put up the fence, or the shed, and all of my stuff's in the shed, so it's all probably ruined. I had a carport. As you can see, it's been ripped off from here. I had a carport. I also had a screened-in porch.
The extent of the damage is shocking even for Floridians who have experienced strong storms in the past and rebuilt afterward. They say the other storms were nothing compared to Ian.
This was just absolutely devastating. Nobody in Cape Coral, nobody in Fort Myers, nobody here thought that it would be this bad. They kept talking about Tampa all the time on the news. And I'm like, Fort Myers, Cape Coral, we're the ones going to get hit.
Florida's barrier islands also sustained incredible damage. Life on Pine Island, the largest, used to be seashells, fishing, and tranquil views. Now residents face fallen power lines, damaged restaurants, and flattened homes.
The road we're standing on right now was actually leading to the Pine Island, which was a very popular vacation spot. But after the storm, the island's main connection with the mainland was cut off, and the Pine Island is in ruins now.
Floridians, especially Lee County residents, now face months and years of cleanup. Begüm Dönmez Ersoy, VOA News, Fort Myers, Florida.
For more analysis, we still have Voice of America's Jessica Stone with us. Jessica, what are the cost estimates at this point for the storm damage done in Florida in particular?
Well, it's really remarkable. Analysts now pegging Ian as one of the 10 most historically costly storms in the United States. Estimated cost somewhere between 70 now to 120 billion US dollars in economic damage. And this comes, of course, already on top of high inflation rates at record 40-year highs here in the United States, which, of course, with the with the interest rate increases that the Federal Reserve has put out, we are seeing higher borrowing costs for all of those repairs. There is some good news here, though, Priyanka, and that is that Ian actually spared what is a very prominent area for fertilizer production. Had those fertilizer plants in Florida and South Carolina been touched, we would have seen a much greater impact on the economy here in the United States from that storm.
Jessica, this week it also got a lot tougher for President Biden to keep the gas prices low for American motorists with that decision from OPEC to slash production. How is that playing out in Washington?
Yeah, not well, because, of course, we're about 3 or 4 weeks now from the midterm elections, which could change the balance of power here in Washington, not here at the White House, but down the street on Pennsylvania Avenue and in Congress. And this was actually seen here in Washington as a direct rebuke to President Biden and to Washington's support for Ukraine's position in the conflict in Ukraine. White House says the president is disappointed by OPEC's decision to cut production by 2 million barrels a day. Biden economic advisors say the decision will be worse, of course, for low and medium income nations. Of course, it's terrible timing for his party because, as I say, the midterms are just a few weeks away, and so much of what happens here in Washington is driven by the midterm election this season.
Jessica Stone, thanks so much for all those inputs, and thanks for joining us on this special broadcast from Washington, D.C.